Welcome to Rathcormac in County Sligo. It's Rathcormac Bay behind us. The Rathcormac means the fort of Cormac. It's actually up this way towards Drumcliff. There's a powerful king that ruled this area about 1600 years ago. This is also known as the Plain of the Fomorians. It was where like a lot of kingdoms in Ireland met. Ulster, the Breffni, which is a kingdom that existed across north central Ireland, and Connacht. They all kind of met in this area here. That's why it was strategically a very important area. Also had access to the ocean. Now I want to talk about witchcraft and witch hunts of the past. This is a hugely stupefied topic that has all kinds of nonsense put into it, mainly by Wiccans, but anyone else who has a kind of an agenda, whether it be political or religious or anything. They always make references, oh, they were burning witches back then. Like they tried to capitalise on it. It was almost like the Holocaust before the Holocaust. And you hear Wiccans making ridiculous claims like 6 million women were burnt, this nonsense during this period. This has to be clarified, and because I saw this guy called Naz Daily on Facebook. He's like this Middle Eastern guy who goes around selling globalist propaganda. He's like Russell Brand with a kebab, and it's just the most nauseating twee garbage you could imagine. And he was in Ireland, and he had, of course, being, he exists to break down stereotypes, but he's in Ireland. What does he surround himself with? All these red-headed chicks playing the fiddle. And he's saying this country is the second most highest rated redheaded people. Anyone who's been to Ireland and lived in Ireland would tell you redheads are rare in Ireland. You hardly ever see them. Most people, that's a stereotype that came out of Hollywood because of Maureen O'Hara in the movie The Quiet Man. Very good, entertaining film, I must add. She was a fiery redhead, so Americans, and then it seeps into the zeitgeist that like all Irish women are all fiery redheads. Is kind of nonsense. And so that came from that. Hollywood invented that. So he's for a guy who goes around the world claiming to break down stereotypes. He didn't have any problem stereotyping the Irish. Anyway, forget about him. But that's what inspired me to do this video. He claimed that in the past in Ireland, people who had red hair were considered witches and they were persecuted. Now that's a classic example of how it was just pulled out of his ass and put out there, and people don't question it and they believe it without thinking about it. That did not happen. That was not true. Now, it's just something that he pulled out to try and fit his political correctness agenda about diversity and things like this. Nonsense. Now, regarding real witch hunts, now in Ireland there's almost zero, and I mean zero. There's probably 4 or 5 cases. You can probably count on one hand how many cases of witchcraft trials there have been in Ireland. Some of them they're only famous because of the ones like Petronella, for the simple reason that it's so rare. Ireland has almost no history of witchcraft trials and witchcraft persecution, and when they did happen, they happened in Presbyterian areas that were mainly controlled by Puritans, or those kinds, or Cromwellian type religious sects. And Catholics in Ireland did not persecute witches, they tolerated them. And you'll find that all across the Catholic world, that witches fared much better in Catholic countries, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Italy and so on, than they fared in Protestant countries. And that's what it was, the Protestants who did all the witch burning and all the witch killing. To like 99%, or 95% at least. I'm not putting down Protestants, I'm just saying this is what happened. Now, mainly because of things like the Puritans and that kind of thing, and Lutherans especially in Germany and Central Europe. Now you see a situation like Ireland, a Catholic country, had almost zero persecution of witchcraft. It was tolerated. And it's still tolerated in Ireland. Irish people have always held witchcraft and witches in a kind of a wise women, Shanda Shan Van Vox, have always held them in a very high regard. The wise woman, that'll never change. That's part of our culture. That was swept out by Presbyterianism. If you go across 11 miles across the sea in Scotland, you found out that they were persecuting witches left, right and centre. And the more Presbyterian the society was, the more vicious the persecutions of witches were. You had that particularly in Sweden, and you had it in Germany, of course. Now, what always struck me, and what should strike people, and it's very important in this day and age, of how these witchcraft trials and these witchcraft burnings and persecutions came to pass, was they were done in a very, very legal manner. Very, very legal. It was, it wasn't a case. People had this impression that like it was all pitchforks and the locals all ran down to a woman's house and they all were screaming and they took them outside and burnt her. It wasn't like that at all. These witchfinder generals worked rigorously within the law. Now the law was heavily biased in favour of things like the Hammer of the Witches, the Malus Maleficarum, and also the King James Bible, which were also intolerant of anything that wasn't Christian. And so, but within that context, within that paradigm, it was seen as an extremely, and it was approached as an extremely legal. A legal thing. You see that, like in many cases, these witchfinder generals were not openly. There are stereotypes like your man, I think it's Marlowe, was his name was in England, but that did seem to fit that bill. But that was often driven by money. They were paid money to clean witches out of a neighbourhood, and it was also property and land dealings were also involved in that as well. So it was business, it was money, and most of them worked very stringently within the law. They really thought that they were doing the good work for the community. And many witchfinders and prosecutors tried everything they could to not have women hanged or have rocks put on top of them and crushed or beheaded or whatever the prevailing thing, what execution style was in that culture. It was very interesting. It's very frightening too, because it shows you how the law, everything is done within the law, and everything is legal, that kind of thing, and there's a classic example of like, if it's legal, it's okay to kill people based on their religious beliefs. A lot of the times it was a land grab, or someone was jealous of a neighbour's property and wanted it, and this kind of thing. See, there was a lot of that. Now, the vast majority of witch burnings, and I'll put that in quotations, witch burnings that we hear about, and the ones that the Wiccans and so on love to try and capitalise on, were actually Christians. There were sectarian wars between Catholics and Protestants. What would happen was, during the Reformation, if you had an English or a German or a French translation of the Bible, you could be declared a witch, because only a Latin was allowed. So these people would be declared witches or Satanists or witchcraft practitioners, and they were burned alive. They were burned alive because they were Protestants. They were burned alive because they were Protestants. And the same happened with Catholics. They burned the Catholics alive because they were declared them witches. It was an easy way to deal with them in a sectarian conflict. It was an easy way to dehumanize them and then just wipe them out. So you see, this is the Christianity. It's the problem with Christianity again. As soon as Christianity arrived in Europe, as soon as it dragged itself out of the desert of Syria, it started attacking anyone that wasn't Christian. Except the main power player, which was Rome, which it became part of. It weaseled its way into the Roman Empire, but it attacked everything. And if you look at as soon as they became organised and powerful, they exterminated the Cathars. Again, they claimed to be witches in league with the devil. When the Cathars were all exterminated, they moved in on the Jews, and particularly in Germany. And the Holocaust, the pogroms that happened in mostly Protestant countries. Although there were expulsions out of places like Iberia, they were not mass slaughters that you had in places like Hesse in Germany. Now, they were all, again, that was because the Christian intolerance. They'd already wiped out the pagans prior to the Cathars, and what pagans were left in Prussia and in Karelia in Eastern Europe, they sent out the Swedish Crusades against them. The Christian cannot help itself. It has to destroy anything that isn't Christian. It's the Abrahamic mind virus that implanted into the European turns them into an intolerant monster. And that's why Christianity is not our religion. It should be not tolerated as our religion. We're turning our backs on Christianity as the only future for Western man and Western woman. So, and that was the majority. And then when the Reformation came along, the Christians had no one else left to kill, and the Abrahamic mind virus craves blood and slaughter, and a belief in itself as being the only pious, sanctimonious one. So it goes about slaughtering the opposition, creates Catholics and Protestants and one against the other, and they just slaughtered each other. And that's what happens. That's what they do. That's how they function. And so when you hear people say, the burning time, they killed 6 million of our witches, our wise women, during the burning time. Someone dressed for pointy cosplay witch or pointy hat at Salem or something. She's full of shit. Very few witches were burnt, even during witch persecutions. The relatively small numbers compared to what was unleashed during sectarian wars or anti-Semitic pogroms and of course the Cathars. Very few numbers, and it was mainly Presbyterian countries, Catholic countries, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, generally tolerated witches, as did the Slavic countries who were under Orthodox Christianity, which is again a kind of paganized one anyway. And so always remember that one. The witchcraft thing has been witchcraft persecution thing has been blown completely out of proportion, and you're probably safer as a witch than you are as a rival religion, organized religion to Christianity. You're much safer as a witch.